Welcome to the In Shape Fitness Show. I'm Coach Kim, and today's podcast is called Fighting with Gravity. I've done a couple of podcasts that talk about gravity, your interaction with gravity, and how important it is on a regular basis, a daily basis, to maintain your functional ability to move the way that you want to keep your quality of life high. And then also its effect on your metabolic processes that take place inside of your body, literally at the microscopic level, how gravity affects your cellular respiration, your blood flow, your energy level, the things that make a difference in terms of the way you feel about your body. So we're going to talk a little bit today about a scientist that used to work at NASA, who I've read extensively about. And we're going to talk a little bit about this interesting group of scientists that have been, the separate group of scientists that have been studying the ability or the inability for older people to lower down to the floor and to get back up off of the floor. And I'm going to give you some tips in terms of exercises that can help you acquaint yourself again with gravity. Because what's interesting about exercise, even if you are a dedicated exerciser, if you will, if you're someone that goes to the gym and sits on a stationary bike, for example, for 20 minutes a couple times a week, because that's what your doctor told you to do, and you are committed to being healthy. So you want to get your heart rate up, and you go in and you sit down on a bicycle or maybe an elliptical machine, or you go for a long walk a couple times a week, or even if you do something like a crazy thing, like I coach the team that prepares for the New York City Marathon every year and raises money for youth running programs in New York City, and even marathon runners have these interesting issues with gravity in terms of the way that functional movements descend into chaos in some ways as the body gets older, and the joints and the recruited muscles and then your center of gravity help or hinder your ability to do certain things. So like sitting even into a chair, particularly a low chair, but a regular sort of armchair, and standing back up without using your hands gets really hard for people. So we do a lot of work around preparing the muscles and doing the things that you need to do in order to be able to interact with gravity productively through your life. And so we're going to end on that note. But I first want to talk about Joan Vernikos, because Dr. Joan Vernikos is someone that I've read up about and written about, because she is the subject of part of my chapter on interacting with gravity in the book that I wrote. Really incredible background to think about a woman who was the director of life sciences at NASA, which means she was a doctor, and she was in charge of the physical health of the astronauts going into space. So she made sure that they were fit, ready to go when they left, and then she helped them get back in shape once they returned to Earth. And she monitored these astronauts, obviously, while they were in space as well. So her work is interesting for three reasons that pertain to regular people. She was able to show how the loss of gravity, she was the person that showed how the loss of gravity negatively impacts the human body. And by now you probably have read about how astronauts, and there are only a few hundred of them in our country today, but how astronauts lose muscle mass, and their heart is less conditioned, and they don't sleep well, and they have digestive issues. Their metabolism slows. They age in space when they leave the Earth's gravitational pull. So she was the person that sort of demonstrated that took the measurements, and then was able to show that the temperament of astronauts even changes without their grounding here on Earth, men and women who travel to space suffer from undue stress on their joints, and as I said, their muscle mass, their blood pressure rises, and so on. Amazingly enough, of course, once they get back to Earth, astronauts are closely monitored, and they do what needs to be done to return their bodies to their pre-flight status, their state of physical being. They work out, if you will, under really intense observation to return to Earth in a healthy way. So as soon as they get back down, the return to fitness is part of their job. Kind of like Hollywood actors, they have to bulk up for roles and the specifications that make them, kind of fit the role that they're playing, and then they have to return to their previous size in the aftermath, in the prologue, if you will, or epilogue rather. Anyway, so that's the first thing. So she was the person that recognized the negative impact that it has on astronauts. And we know this, and we all see this, and maybe we don't really make a connection to it to our regular lives, but that's where the second amazing component, which is that so many people give up on health because they think that their body is beyond natural repair. Now, they may opt for medical intervention, but, it seems very dark and difficult sometimes, I think, when if you need to lose X number of pounds, or you've had an injury or a chronic or a sort of an acute issue in terms of your health, to naturally get back to your pre-incident issue, or to your healthy weight, is a daunting set of objectives, a daunting goal, and very challenging set of objectives. So people resort to drugs. They resort to other things like, physical therapies and various treatments, corrective surgeries. Sometimes it's all, it's sort of a little bit of everything. I know tons and tons of our clients, they end up with us after they've tried everything on their own. And it's kind of like health can be ordered up on a menu, except that it doesn't really satisfy oftentimes, because we spend money on it. We expect, our expectations are really high when we're consumers, and we purchase our outcomes, if you will. And then it's also rarely sustainable. That's why yo-yo dieting was so rampant for such a long time. Why it still really is, although I think it's a little less so nowadays. But it's just not sustainable to not take the natural approach. But ultimately what ends up happening is that people give up. But that's why her research is so interesting, because not only was she studying, helping the astronauts prepare, as I said before, she was the person that sort of figured out that there were these negative consequences to being in space, to the way that the lack of gravity in space had an effect on the human body. But she was also in charge of what happened once they came back, and could help this very controlled group of specimens, if you will, get back to their healthy selves, their healthy bodies, once they touched back down on Earth and did get to interact with the Earth's gravitational force again. I just think that's so fascinating. It is never too late, which is the second part of the point, and the second part, which is the point, that it is never too late to get started. The third relevant part of Dr. Vernikos's research pertains to the threat that humans pose to our own bodies by ignoring the natural need to interact with gravity on a daily basis. Now, these are micro interactions. This is not leaving the gravitational, sort of existence we have here on Earth, going into space where there is zero gravity. But, and Dr. Verna Koss writes about this in the book that she wrote, which I think is called Sitting Kills. It's not, a bestseller. It's not even all that easy to digest on a sort of a narrative basis, but it's fascinating that she calls it that, and then uses a lot of examples from her work at NASA to talk about how, and then frame out this theory she has of a quasi-zero gravity atmosphere that we have created for ourselves because of our sedentary lives. So gravity is here on Earth, and obviously it's a physical force that's vital for the continuance of all of life, plant life, animal life, our own lives. We have to have gravity to exist on this planet, but by not interacting with it, by not moving around and up and down, gravity is no friend to our bodies. To benefit from gravity, you have to fight it, to engage with it. And that is one of the main reasons why so many popular fitness trends offer bleak results. Now, I'm going to get to those second and the next couple of parts of the podcast in just a minute, but I just want to go back for a second to the person who is a compliance exerciser. I talked about this person earlier that might go to the gym twice a week because that's what the doctor says you're supposed to do, so you do it and you are in compliance, and that is great. But take the treadmill or a stationary bike, for example. The entire workout takes place on a flat or virtually flat surface. You might press the incline button every so often or create that phantom hill on the stationary bike with resistance, but the majority of the sessions take place on a consistently flat surface, and you're headed in one direction. It has its benefits, its cardiovascular benefits for sure, but it lacks compound movement in multiple dimensions, planes of motion. Taking the stairs as a different example forces your body to interact with gravity. Though, I'll just for a moment go up to my sort of 1990s gym hag years when I was on the Stairmaster all the time. I don't know if you ever got on a Stairmaster, and they don't really exist, though ellipticals come close. The actual stairs are key here because the actual stairs force your body to interact with gravity, where a stair climbing machine the Stairmaster, the stair climbing machine, was the biggest exercise hoax in history, with maybe the exception of that power plate thing. But climbing the stairs is the real stairs, is that force movement against gravity, whereas the stair machine and even the elliptical exerts downward pressure against air without real work against gravity. Now, what are the exercises that work you against gravity? That is what I'm going to talk about at the end of the podcast. So I am going to not go into it here yet. I just want to talk for a second about this other scientist, because the other scientist that's doing a study, it's a study, actually there are two of them, but they're studies about the longevity of people as it relates to whether a person can get down on the floor and stand back up without using his or her hands. So the first time I read about this was a study that was in Birmingham, England, and it was a female researcher, and she walked parts of Birmingham and just literally in the park would ask people, would you mind standing and sitting, trying to do it without, trying to sit down onto the ground without putting your hands down, trying to stand back up without putting your hands down, that sort of thing. And assigned a sort of a score to each of the individuals, and and was able to correlate some level of functional fitness to this really simple test. So sit and then stand and then repeat. It seems like it's deceptively silly, deceptively simple. And there's this other scientist in Brazil who uses the test as well, and he only uses it with his patients, so the control is pretty small. But he again talks about this in terms of the aging, how as you get older and you aren't able to do as much, or you don't think you're able to do as much, your loss of muscle mass, your loss of muscle power and balance can increase the risk of really dangerous falls. And this is something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, because the clients that I see one-to-one, though I don't see younger people for the most part, almost everyone is either in their late 40s or 50s. And I have, as most of you know, hopefully if you've been listening to these podcasts over the years, everyone knows that my 91-year-old client, who I've been working with now for 8 years, is someone that I also have sit and stand. He can't get all the way down to the floor, but it's a really significant issue to just be able to lower your body and then lift back up, to be able to interact with gravity, and then the sort of coordination of the symphonic coordination of the joints and functional power that you need to lower down and lift back up. It is quite fascinating. So this study was published in the European Journal of Cardiology, and it included 2,000 patients actually, all in their 50s to 80 people. And he's assigned a score to two people based on whether on their ability to complete this task. Fewer than 8 points on the test, he actually found a twice as likelihood of mortality. So it's akin to, and this has to do with the cardiovascular component and how gravity, interacting with gravity, affects your cardiovascular system. It taxes in a positive way your cardiovascular response. And those who are able to complete this task are less likely, or their chance of mortality goes down. I'm not going to get into the specifics of it completely, but the way that you do it, and this is kind of important. And again, you know what I'll do? I'll put this blog on my blog at bodybyInShape.com, that link to show how you accrue the points so that it's easier to explain. Because essentially it's standing up with your arms beside your body, standing, and then in order to lower your body down to the floor, you cross one leg over the other, sort of with your arms beside your body. You keep them beside your body, and then you lower into a squat, and then you end up sitting crisscross style on your butt with your legs crossed. Again, not touching the floor with your hands. And then to get back up, you have to keep your arms in the air, keep your hands up, and lift the butt from that crisscross seated position, and then you stand back up straight up. So if you put your hand on the floor, you score a point. Like if you have to put your hand down to support yourself, if you have to put a knee down to support yourself, you accumulate a point. If you have to put your hand on your knee, you have to you score a point. So that's how the sort of the point accumulation means that the higher the score, the more the mortality sort of prediction goes up, if you will. In any case, it's really, really fascinating and deceptively simple. It literally has to do with your ability to sit down on your butt on the floor and then to stand back up. And I find that really, really fascinating. So gravity is really, really important. Now, I promised that I would end with some conversation about things that you can do that will positively affect your ability to complete this task. And there are. Think about the muscles that you use when you sit down. And it's not just your quads, not just your thigh muscles. The part of the issue, in addition to the general sort of one-dimensional component of exercise that we have taken to kind of rely on, like stationary bicycles and ellipticals, or just taking a walk or a jog, is that the multi-dimensional movement is lacking. We don't do enough because the rest of the day we're basically sitting on our butts, right? We're either, maybe walking to a desk or walking to our bed or walking to our car, and then we're basically sitting down and living the most of our lives on our butts, which is why our butt is just a sad state of affairs. It may, whether it's really small or really big, most people that sit all day have a serious problem in terms of neuromuscular response, recruiting the butt to be used properly in functional movement, which means that if you like have gone to a boot camp or you've gone to a gym and you've done some squats and you feel all of the soreness that you feel accumulates in your thighs, that's because you're not doing your squats correctly. The thigh muscles are going to do the work, but you're also supposed to use your butt and to use your hips, and your butt and your hips as part of this sort of bullied, maybe forsaken part of your body, they suffer. And so if you get down the things that you can do are planks, really simple, to shore up and force the coordinated effort of the lower trunk with your upper trunk and the internal tummy muscles with the rest of your tummy muscles and your back, right? So a plank, really, really important for you to be able to do, hold a plank. And a minute is really the grail that you should seek to be able to stabilize yourself in that position for about a minute. If you're a little older, you can go a little less time, but that's the grail, right? So the plank, the hip bridge, and not just a regular hip bridge where your feet are on the floor and you bounce up and down with your butt, but where your knees are bent and then your arms are beside your body and you lift up and lower down, those hip bridge dips. Those are pretty easy, generally speaking, for people. But if you take a few minutes to think about the muscles that you're using with this exercise regimen, one of the things that's really important to do is to lift up one leg. I call this a car jack. The car jack is a one-legged hip bridge. So one leg is going to isolate, and if you keep your foot flat, all of that isolated effort on the stable leg, on the foot that's on the floor, is going to really flare up in a positive way, really energize the butt cheek on that side and the hamstring on that side, which are those two muscle groups that, as I said before, I like to say are bullied, is one of the terms that I use, because I call the quads, the thigh muscles, I call them the bully of the body, that they kind of take over and do more work than they should. But the forsaken muscle groups, the butt and your hip flexors, are really able to be isolated and focused on in the hip bridge. So the plank and the hip bridge are really, really important. Then the other thing I would say is to think about flexibility. And I don't mean go to a yoga class and get a gold star for getting into and attending a yoga class, even if you go on a regular basis. Now, you can certainly do that, but you don't need to. You just don't need to. But what you do need to do is make sure that your hamstrings are stretched out, your butt is stretched out, and that your hip flexors and your quadriceps and your calf muscles are stretched out, as well as doing some ankle circles in order to allow that sort of stability that you need in order to lower your body down and lift back up without putting your hands on the floor. We're 25 minutes in, so I want to say goodbye, but I want to remind you that I'm going to put the link for this article about the point system so that you can see lowering down and lifting up and how that scoring, at least with this Brazilian study, was relevant in terms of the significance of mortality. And that seems kind of morbid. I rarely talk about it in those terms, but obviously being able to complete the movement pattern multiple times without using your hands or, some other sort of assisted component that's part of that scoring system is really interesting to me in terms of the high quality of life that I want to help you live. So please take a look at it in just a couple of minutes. I'll post it and let me know if you have any questions. I can be reached at bodybyInshape.com, and I'll be back next week with another podcast. Have a great day.